The last ice age was slowly coming to an end. Massive sheets of ice that had blanketed the Earth for tens of thousands of years were melting and retreating. For the large animals of the Ice Age, this was the moment of apocalypse. The vegetation they depended on was changing faster than their ability to adapt. Food sources became scarce and unpredictable. The giant bodies of mammoths, once an advantage in the cold, now became a burden. Demanding an enormous amount of calories that the environment could no longer provide. Malnutrition and ecological stress were evident in every individual. Their tools were wooden spears tipped with carefully crafted flint. But their ultimate weapon was the brain. The ability to plan, communicate, coordinate, and predict the behavior of prey was the decisive factor for survival. In stark contrast to the brutal hunts outside. Deep within caves, another world existed. These drawings were not mere decoration. They helped capture the essence of the most powerful animals. The use of mineral powders such as red ochre, mixed with binders like animal fat or saliva, reflected a deep understanding of materials. The contrast between mighty mammoths painted on cave walls and the meager scraps of meat on the cave floor revealed a rupture in perception. The hesitation of the Homo sapiens woman as she continued her drawing reflected a crisis of belief, the old rituals. The old symbols seemed to be losing their power as the world around them changed. As the ice melted, the world not only promised new life, but also spread invisible deaths. Vegetation changed rapidly, making survival knowledge accumulated over millennia obsolete. Every root, Every unknown berry carried hidden danger. Facing constant scarcity, instinct forced them to explore and take risks. Safe food from poison was a gamble of life and death, resolved only by trial and error. The most valuable knowledge was often paid with an individual's life, but it was etched into the collective memory of the group, becoming a survival lesson to protect future generations. The act of burying the dead, though still simple, was not only to deal with the body. It reflected the existence of deep bonds and empathy for the loss of their own kind. In that harsh world, the exchange of benefits across species provided enormous survival strength. The relationship between humans and wolves began from calculation on both sides. As large animals declined, both humans and wolves faced hunger. Wolves were pack hunters with high intelligence. Domestication may have begun when bold wolves came close to camps to scavenge leftovers. Instead of chasing them away, Homo sapiens realized the benefit wolf howls and barks were an early warning system against dangerous predators. Sharing food was not charity, but an unspoken exchange. It established a bond based on mutual benefit. Over generations, wolves inclined to cooperate with humans had a higher chance of survival and reproduction. These unconscious steps of selection would forever change both species. Changes in environment required changes in tools. The heavy, long spears designed to pierce the thick hides and muscles of large beasts became useless against smaller. Fast-moving prey. Adaptation was no longer optional, it was mandatory for survival and the Homo sapiens brain had a unique ability reasoning and recognizing basic physical principles through observation. The moment a branch snapped back was not just chance, it revealed stored energy that could be released suddenly. The principle of elasticity and stored force had always existed in nature. But for the first time, it was recognized as a solution to a pressing survival problem. Failure had forced the mind to search for an entirely new path. The birth of the bow was not a single invention. But the result of a chain of complex abstract reasoning steps. The maker had to imagine an object that had never existed. Understand the relationship between its parts and predict its outcome. The first step was material selection. Not every type of wood could be used. It required deep knowledge of tree species, flexibility, and elasticity. Next came the controlled bending of a branch. Creating a bowstring from animal sinew was also a complex process, requiring treatment, drying, and braiding fibers to form a cord that was both strong and elastic. Finally, combining these two parts into a system that stored and released energy marked a leap in cognition. The bow was the first long-range weapon in human evolution, forever changing the balance of power between humans and nature.
I have never heard such a sound.
Alongside the bow came a breakthrough in stone crafting. Instead of shaping large tools from a single rock, Homo sapiens developed microlith technology. This was a completely new approach. By carefully preparing a stone core, the artisan could produce a series of small, thin, uniform, razor-sharp blades with just a few precise strikes. Microliths were too small to use alone. Their strength lay in being components, mounted onto wood or bone shafts with resin. This allowed the creation of composite tools. A knife could be made by attaching many microliths in sequence. If one piece chipped, it could easily be replaced without discarding the whole tool. Combined with bows, microliths created an extremely efficient system. The speed of an arrow was unlike anything before. It traveled faster than anything Homo sapiens could throw by hand. This meant prey had less time to react. Accuracy changed the hunt as well. Arrows allowed hunters to strike vital points from a safe distance. The thud of an arrow sinking into a tree trunk was the sound of change. Proved that stored energy in a bow could be released with purpose. Homo sapiens could now strike prey from afar, reshaping survival strategies forever. Hunting in dense forests required a complete change of tactics. The open plains of the Ice Age were giving way to thick woodland. This environment was unsuitable for long chases. It demanded silence, camouflage, and ambush. The bow was the perfect weapon here. Hunters could wait in hiding and bring down prey from afar without being detected. Homo sapiens no longer relied on just a few large animals. They expanded to smaller mammals, birds, and fish. Diets diversified, food supplies stabilized, and survival became less dependent on the risky success of massive hunts. Food gathering changed underwater as well. Homo sapiens began developing analogical reasoning, the ability to recognize patterns and structures. A woman did not just see a spider web, she saw a principal trap and hold. A network of interwoven threads with gaps could be applied to catch fish. Making nets required new skills, understanding plant fibers, braiding them into strong cords, and most importantly, knotting techniques repeated to form a durable structure. This marked a shift from active hunting chasing prey to passive harvesting setting traps and waiting. It enabled humans to exploit aquatic resources at an unprecedented scale. Fishing with nets was most effective with cooperation. This strengthened interdependence and community ties. More importantly, reliable food, like river fish, allowed Homo sapiens to stay longer in one place. Semi-sedentary living began. Instead of endlessly tracking herds, they built camps near stable resources like rivers. They began investing more in shelters. Humans no longer just passed through landscapes, they were shaping them, turning sites into dwellings. This laid the foundation for larger, more complex communities. As humans settled, their relationship with animals shifted, especially wolves. Wolves were no longer scavengers at the camp's edge. They became peripheral members of the community. This behavioral change was the result of generations of interaction. Aggressive wolves were driven off or killed, while those that warned of danger were unconsciously rewarded with food. A wolf's growl was not loyalty as humans saw it, it was territorial defense. The human camp, with steady leftovers, had become part of the wolf's territory. Any intruder threatened its food source. By instinct, the wolf ended up protecting the community. The union of tools and interspecies allies became humanity's strongest weapon against danger. Saber-toothed cats were fearsome predators of the Ice Age. Thanks to wolf warnings, threats were detected early, blowing attackers and giving precious moments to prepare. Bows gave hunters an advantage. Striking from a safe distance turned deadly encounters into manageable conflicts. Arrows didn't need to kill immediately. Wounding was enough to scare off predators. This event reinforced Homo sapiens' position in the food chain. They were no longer mere prey. With tools and allies, they became dominant. A child stroking a wolf symbolized this new recognition. The animal was no longer a threat, but a friend. With dominance secured, humans had space for deeper inner life. Expressed in how they faced death, though, burial rituals showed the growth of a rich spiritual world. Bodies were buried in fetal positions, perhaps symbolizing rebirth or a journey to another world. This was abstract thought, beyond daily survival. Red ochre, the color of blood and life, was sprinkled over the dead, as if granting vitality in the afterlife. Griff's goods symbolized the role and identity of the deceased, reflecting belief in another world. This was evidence of a complex worldview. Death was not the end. Spiritual growth drove creative breakthroughs. Combining fire and stone tools became a skilled technique. Fire softened tree trunks and then stone axes hollowed out the charred wood. Repeated cycles enabled shaping logs far beyond brute force alone. The Dugout canoe opened an entirely new dimension. Rivers and lakes were no longer barriers, but highways and fishing grounds. Boats marked a turning point in migration history. They allowed humans to cross waters, reach islands, and exploit marine resources more effectively than ever. Boats enabled travel, but new tools were needed. Barbed spears. Gormish spear points pierced prey, but slipped out easily, especially with thrashing fish on Sowing. Adding barbs made of bone or microliths solved this does. Once lodged, prey could not escape. This small but vital innovation greatly improved the capture of large, energy-rich fish. Venturing onto rivers offered new perspectives. Discovering islands was not just finding land, but realizing the world was larger than imagined. This sparked curiosity and drove future migrations, carrying humans to every corner of the planet. As groups settled and depended on local resources, like a fish-rich river bend or game-filled forest, the concept of territory began to emerge. The sight of strange footprints was an intrusion, a threat to the community's lifeline. The immediate response of Homo sapiens meant grabbing weapons and taking defensive positions. Showed rising tension between groups. Populations grew and groups lived closer. Competition for resources became inevitable. Bows, once tools of dominance over animals, now became weapons in human conflict. This was the dark side of ecological success. Denser populations meant greater risk of war. The moment two groups pointed arrows at each other was one of the most complex communal situations. It required quick calculations of risk and gain. Open violence would bring casualties to both sides, a costly price. Silence and tension became a form of communication, a miniature Cold War. Each side gauged the other's strength, determination, and intent. When the leader lowered his bow first, it was a subtle act of diplomacy. It signaled peace. But the others still holding their bows showed they were not weak. Pointing to fish and a string of shells introduced a new concept: material exchange. He proposed an alternative to violence trade. Instead of seizing resources by force, they could exchange surpluses for needs. This was the first step in intergroup relations. This trade was more than moving objects. It was a bridge between communities and the spread of knowledge. One group had fish but lacked high-quality flint tools. The other had the reverse. This showed regional specialization. Some areas had better stone, and their people had refined tool-making techniques. When a craftsman examined the new knife, he wasn't just looking at a tool, he was reading its manufacturing process, decoding techniques he hadn't known. Thus, the exchange transferred not just an object, but an idea, a new standard of quality. This fueled innovation as local craftsmen tried to replicate or improve what they observed. This was how tools and culture began spreading widely. Women's role in gathering gave them deep knowledge of plants. They distinguished hundreds of species edible, poisonous, medicinal, or useful for fibers, Sowing. The discovery of wild grains was a turning point. Unlike berries or root, grains had unique traits, high nutrition, and, most importantly, the ability to be dried and stored long-term without spoiling. The act of discarding roots and berries to keep grains was a historic decision. She recognized their potential not just as food for today, but as assurance for the future. This discovery, seemingly by chance, was the product of millennia of observation and plant knowledge. Turning hard grains into food required a chain of processing tools. Pebbles were used to crush seeds on flat stones, releasing nutrients locked in hard shells. The powder was then mixed with water into dough, shaping dry flour into a moldable mass. Finally, baking on hot stones cooked it, making nutrients easier to digest and adding flavor. Each shared piece of bread was more than food, it was knowledge, a new method spreading that would forever change the human diet.
This is thing.
Large-scale harvesting marked a shift from opportunistic gathering to deliberate exploitation. Sickles, made from microliths, were specialized tools. Their curved shape optimized sweeping cuts. Sharp flint pieces formed a serrated edge, highly effective for slicing multiple stalks at once. This efficiency created something new: surplus. For the first time, humans could harvest more food than they could eat immediately. Surplus was a milestone in evolution. It freed humans from the endless search for daily food. It allowed some members to focus on other tasks, making complex tools, performing rituals, or building community structures. Surplus created a new problem: storage and protection. They began digging deep pits to shield grain from moisture, pests, and animals. Burying food was also a defense against rival groups. It was a treasure, a guarantee of survival in hard times. They carved circular signs on stones to mean food buried here. This was a primitive form of writing, storing information outside the human brain. It created a physical, lasting record, enabling knowledge to pass on accurately without relying on memory alone. Sedentary life brought benefits, but also new risks. Living near rivers gave access to water and fish, but exposed them to floods. The disaster revealed human fragility before nature's power. Tools painstakingly made could vanish in moments. For nomads, floods were inconvenience they could move. But for semi-sedentary groups, it was catastrophe. They lost shelters and tools. This painful lesson showed the need for careful settlement choices. With hunting, fishing, and gathering useless, survival depended on one thing: preparation. Food was no longer just about what could be found today. It relied on what had been stored before. The memory of storage pits, marked by stones, became the only hope. Finding dry grains in underground pits affirmed the value of foresight and storage. These grains were not just food, they were seeds of renewal. They allowed survival through the hardest times when no other food was available. They provided energy to rebuild. The last flatbread shared became a ritual meal, not just to satisfy hunger, but to affirm survival, resilience, and wisdom. The lesson would be etched deep in memory. Rebuilding the village higher was not just relocation, it was a conscious decision, shaped by painful lessons. They learned to adapt not just to environments, but to risks. Shelters were sturdier, with deep posts and clay walls showing intent for permanence. They weren't temporary huts, they were building a village, a lasting community. This was a crucial step in shifting from foraging to farming. Permanent settlement was necessary for cultivation and herding, requiring continuous presence across seasons. As Homo sapiens settled and planned ahead, storing food, building villages, tracking time became vital. A carved bone was not decoration, it was a calculator. An early calendar. Lines and dots marked days and lunar phases. Tracking cycles of the moon let them predict seasons, fish migrations, and fruiting times. They observed natural patterns, recognized rules, and created symbols to record and predict. Reading time would become invaluable once farming began, fully tied to seasonal cycles. Timekeeping aided better planning for storage. Then, a chance discovery by the hearth gave the perfect tool pottery. Clay, when fired at high heat, became hard and waterproof. For the first time, humans could make watertight containers from common earth. Pottery changed everything. Allowed boiling water to kill bacteria and cook tough foods. More importantly, it provided ideal vessels to store grains. Protecting them better than skins or baskets. Agriculture's rise was inseparable from pottery. Homo sapiens connected new shoots with spilled grains from earlier harvests. They realized seeds were not just food, but life itself, capable of sprouting into new plants. Floods, by leaving fertile silt, had created perfect conditions for germination. They were no longer mere gatherers of nature's gifts. They were beginning to understand how nature worked. This awareness transformed them from consumers to producers. This simple act was one of the most meaningful in human history. It was the shift from observation to deliberate action. Humans no longer waited for chance. They recreated processes they had observed. Hands once used to chip stone and throw spears were now sowing seeds, nurturing. This was the first act of farming, signaling a fundamental change in the human-earth relationship. Humans were no longer just part of nature, they were shaping and controlling it. This act of sowing, though small, planted the seeds of a new era.